Hello and welcome to the very first webinar of Societal Platform Thinking. I'm your host, Sahana. In this webinar, we have invited in many ways the inner circle of the Societal Platform Network. Organizations that we've engaged with over the past couple of months or maybe a year to catalyze the societal platform thinking through a specific mission. Through today's session, we aim to reach more people within these organizations, your organizations, and have a discourse with more of you on the need for a new way of thinking. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the speakers. Sanjay Purohit, who's the Chief Curator of the Societal Platform Thinking at EkStep Foundation, and Shankar Marwada, the CEO and co-founder of EkStep Foundation. Just a few ground rules. The webinar is scheduled for 45 minutes of presentation, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Participants, you have the option of either typing in your questions during the session using the Q&A tool that's visible on your screen at the bottom of the page, or wait for the end of the section where you can raise your hand to ask your questions. The speakers will respond to all the questions at the end of the session. We will now begin the webinar. Thank you.
Hi, this is Sanjay here. Good afternoon and good morning to those of you who are joining in from the US, in case any of you are. Welcome to this webinar. What I would do is quickly introduce you to the subject and then walk through along with Shankar on the entire discussion. So the agenda for today is I'll do a quick introduction, followed by reimagining education, the EkStep mission, which Shankar will talk through. And then I'll come back and talk to you about how some of that thinking can be abstracted and applied to various different kinds of societal missions across multiple sectors such as education, healthcare, financial inclusion, so on. And then we'll have a Q&A, the key takeaways. The idea of a societal platform and this entire thinking around it started when we started thinking through what could be some of the large questions that we face as a society. How can we resolve complex societal challenges with speed, at scale, and sustainably? All of you are aware that in India, we deal with extremely dynamic and complex societal challenges. And so it's important for us to deal with that complexity in a certain window of time. Otherwise, problems grow to be much faster than the rate at which we can solve them. We have to deal with them at scale, a term that we often use being population scale, which essentially means fundamentally the aspect that you have to deal with different segments of the society, different contexts, different geographies, and we have to do this in a sustainable manner so that these things can be worked across many, many years, given that we are dealing with problems which will not get solved in 1, 2, or 3 years. Some of the lessons early on, we picked up from a very large question that we were working on, saying how can we empower 1 billion residents of India with a unique identity and a digital platform to authenticate anytime, anywhere. This was the Aadhaar mission, which the team at that time was leading, and there's a lot of learning that we got on that journey, which we abstracted. And then we started thinking about, can this line of thinking be applied to different questions of similar nature? For example, how can we deliver affordable credit to 100 million first-time formal borrowers in the next 5 years? So how can we increase access to learning opportunities for 200 million children by 2020? Or how can we transform governance through an open digital infrastructure for 2,000 cities and towns by 2020? What we will do now is that we will dive into this thinking through a specific deep dive in education, which Shankar will lead us through. And then I'll come back and talk about what are some of the principles that we have abstracted that can be applied in the context of different missions. So with that as a sort of background, without further ado, let me hand over to Shankar to walk us through the EkStep mission. Shankar?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll walk you through a recap of the journey of EkStep over the last 3-4 years. and walk you through how we are solving for the problem of reach and the problem of quality and outcomes. Education in India is beset by poor learning outcomes. The numbers there give you a sense of the scale and the complexity of the problem. But what adds to the complexity is the tight interlinkages among the various actors, each of whom need quality solutions in their respective contexts. So there is no magic bullet, there is no one size fits all solution. Yet, there is one thing that unites this complex ecosystem, which is textbooks. The education system in India is anchored around textbooks. Across the whole gamut, as a nation, we print around 2 billion textbooks every year. This was the context in which we set up EkStep's mission back in 2015, which is to improve literacy and numeracy for 200 million children of India by 2020, with a focus on increasing their access to learning opportunities. We started off with 4 strategies, first of which is it's about learning in the context of the child. It is about creating a pull for the various solutions and not just about supply side thinking. It's about leveraging the existing ecosystem, the massive and complex network of actors who are already engaged and have been so for decades in trying to solve the problem. It's not about ignoring them or bypassing them, but how do you engage the ecosystem in solving the problem? Last but not least, creating a technology platform that enables scale. So through these 4 strategies, we are chasing the 3 end goals of any societal platform, which is scale. Our scale is 200 million children. Speed. For us, the goal is to achieve this by 2020, and sustainability. Moving on, I'll walk you through how we are solving for reach in the context of education in India. As we looked around, we realized that in the world of technology, disruptive solutions ride on shared infrastructure. If you have a Uber, Airbnb, Flipkart, Ola, Amazon, they all have benefited from internet, global positioning satellites and systems, cloud infrastructure, and many other public and private shared infrastructure. Without these shared infrastructure, you would not have got the range of innovations that we now take for granted. So we set about creating a digital infrastructure for learning. This is an open learning project called Sunbird. And if you go to the website sunbird.org, you'll get more details. But instead of trying to solve the problem of education, we first created digital learning infrastructure. And the government of India leveraged this digital infrastructure to create a national program for teachers and learners. They called it Diksha. And Diksha was created as an infrastructure which the central government would make available to all the state governments, and it would help in the ideas mentioned on the slide: teacher development, teaching and learning content, a platform for teachers' content, etc. So even this is not, Diksha is not meant as a solution, but as a platform for various states. Diksha was launched, as you see in the picture, by the Vice President on 5th of September, Teachers' Day 2017, more than a year ago. And since then, it is rocketed off to a great start. Already around 5 states have already printed textbooks which are on the ground being used by teachers and students, and 21 more states have onboarded, allowing Diksha to reach 106 million students, 3 million teachers, and a combined 450 million textbooks. Essentially, what is happening with Diksha is it is bridging the real world with the digital world, and I'll explain with this example. So by next year, there will be 450 million textbooks. That number as of now is 248 million textbooks. These textbooks will have a QR code with a unique number on each of the chapters. With the Diksha app, if you scan the QR code, you get access to a wide range of content which is around that topic in the chapter, which is carefully curated by the respective states. So it's essentially, the textbook has now become a gateway, a bridge to the world of digital content. That is because we said that a textbook reaches every household. How can we use the textbook as a platform, not just to create one solution, but to create a range of solutions around preparing the teachers for the class, teachers planning their specific class, giving the materials to teach better, allowing them to assess the learning levels of the children, allowing children to learn, practice, and something which can be used not just in school, but also at home and even by tuition teachers. The whole idea was, how do you enhance the learning experience by combining the physical with the digital? Different states are using Diksha in their own ways. Not only is there a diversity of across the political spectrum, and on the map you see the 5 green states, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh, that have already implemented Diksha in this academic year, and the rest are the states that have begun the process of onboarding, and their textbooks will hit the next academic year. You see the range of languages, 15 languages. More than 5,000 teachers will be engaged in creating content across these states. And to make it device agnostic, there will be 5 device interface modes. A mobile phone, which will be most common. If you don't have a mobile phone, a laptop or a tablet or a television or a projector. And every state is free to decide whichever of these 5 device interface modes or a combination of these that they want to use. But what is uniting all these states is a single national platform with Diksha as a major central program announced by the government of India in this year's budget, a single interlinked taxonomy structure, and a single QR code registry, which is important for states to discover content created by other states. So if Assam wants content on a particular topic, say division in math, they can look up content around division in Kannada, change the language to suit their local context, and then use that, because all the content on it is all Creative Commons. This gives you a sense of the local press reportage. As you can see, there's an element of state pride. Each state is innovating in its own way. And the other thing you will notice in all of this is there is no mention of EkStep Foundation. And if you're wondering how that is, the answer is because the government is using Sunburn, which is a digital infrastructure which is created by EkStep but does not belong to EkStep because it is a public good as part of the philosophy of societal platform. What EkStep is doing is helping the government to implement this technology and aiding in the adoption of this technology by the various states. There is a groundswell of demand that has been picked up, different use cases across different states. Why this groundswell? We were also a bit puzzled in the beginning because the response was far better than we originally thought. The answer in a humorous way came through one of the teacher WhatsApp groups, that the QR code in a textbook is a technology that is strangely familiar. People are aware of QR codes, they're aware of apps and mobile phones, and they're obviously aware of textbooks. But combining these three into a routine that is familiar to them is in some ways part of the reason why QR codes in textbooks linked to digital content, or as it is now called, energized textbooks, has taken off like a rocket. But it's not just the technology, it's also a very structured program approach that is both institutional, which means it takes into account the central and state governments and their agencies. It's also sustainable because budgets have been created at the central and state level, and the respective accountable organizations are part of this whole initiative. So for the government, it is yet another initiative like the hundreds that they run every year, and something which they are very, very comfortable with. What helped in the adoption is the creation of micro packages, very, very intensely researched and made specific to each of the roles, so that each actor had to just implement one extra step in a routine that they are already familiar with. And a list of that is mentioned. As an example, those who were in the business of content curation at the state level, they continue doing that. They do not have to worry about QR codes and printing and budgets, because that is the responsibility of others. So carefully figuring out in the complex interlinked chain of actors the roles and routines of each actor, and creating micro packages specific to that actor to make the implementation easy. A lot of thought and effort went into that. However, all of this, as I mentioned, is powered by EkStep's digital infrastructure. It is created by EkStep, but it is open public good. So in a sense, anybody else can add to it. Think of Sunbird as a set of digital Lego blocks which are continuously evolving and are being used by Diksha as one instance, but it can be used by anybody else. So this digital infrastructure also has a very rich data schema. Though this looks very complex, this kind of a schema is very essential to interpreting the massive amount of data, both the quantity and the quality that is being generated. 3 gigabytes per day. And the graphs there give you a sense of the consistency of usage patterns across days. Each set of peaks and troughs is a 24-hour period, and you see consistency within a week and across weeks. This kind of data opens up possibilities, and it allowed us to start thinking about how does one solve for quality and outcomes with this kind of a start. So in a way, think of energized textbooks or QR codes in textbooks as digital learning highways through which each and every household is reached. How can we use these digital learning highways to address learning outcomes, but in an evolvable, iterative process? So as a result of the kind of data and initial response, the program focus has very rapidly shifted gears to quality and outcomes. And this is important because the role of data in doing this is something which is worth noting here. It is by looking at the specifics, 20 million plus learning experiences, 650,000 plus hours of learning interaction. Around 15% of the users use it 3 or more times a week. This kind of data is stunning, and it opened up possibilities for the government system and is nudging them towards thinking of quality. The idea is simple. If I have these many children and teachers downloading and playing digital content, and data is telling me what kind of content is most popular, can I now start thinking in terms of improving the quality of these learning experiences? So you see some examples of most used literacy content in Tamil Nadu, in math also. And different states are thinking about how to improve the quality for next year's academic year. The ground feedback, and we do a lot of research, is also encouraging. And the anecdotal evidence beyond the data that we see of teachers preparing for the next day's class or using the devices in class, we are getting these kind of reports from the various states. This election poster gives you some idea of how the feedback on the ground, because politicians can very quickly sense programs that the citizens are reacting favorably to. And here we have the Andhra Pradesh Education Minister talking about how he brought QR codes into India for the first time. And this is part of his re-election campaign for the Andhra elections next year. So essentially, what we have done is gone through a repeatable cyclical process, as mentioned here, which is start with a mission. Think of programs that are needed to solve that mission. Think of the solutions that can help in that program, and then think of the digital assets needed for those solutions. It does not matter whether you start with a mission or you start with digital assets and solutions, but these 4 components, mission, program, solutions, and assets, are the different layers, and each layer has to be thought through in an integrated manner with the other layers. So likewise, as an example, we are now working on a foundational learning program that is that focuses on fixing the hard spots. Hard spots are those concepts in education that are difficult to teach or learn and where the children perform poorly. So there are ideas being piloted, tried out in 1,000 schools in Tamil Nadu, which are trying to solve the problem. And the data from the 1,000 schools will help in refining the solution, refining the program in an evolvable, iterative manner. And this is how there are multiple other programs being piloted. The idea is the same. If you have a great solution, see whether that solution can be unbundled into digital assets what kind of programs can be triggered from that solution. And once you have started implementing a solution through a program, how can data help to refine the solution and the program? So in a sense, what I walked you through is a societal platform approach to working with the ecosystem. And I'll hand it over to Sanjay here, who will again walk you through the larger idea of societal platform, of which what I've shown you is just one example.
Thank you, Shankar. So now if you were to just think about saying, what's going on here? We started with the idea of education and extending literacy and numeracy learning opportunities to 200 million children. And a classical way would have been that why don't we pilot this in 5 schools and we go ahead and prove it and measure its success and then talk about how do we replicate it in more and more schools, get the funding, the resources. But instead of that, what Shankar walked you through was a process which we call as dolphining, the sine curve kind of a thing you see on the right side, where initially it is about finding some things, designing them and seeing how they work. But then instead of saying, how do I replicate this, is the ability to unbundle and generalize that into a common infrastructure. An infrastructure that can be used by many actors in the ecosystem who can reframe and co-create in their own context. Because there are 3 important challenges to overcome in this process. 1, good quality resources, whether it's knowledge, expertise, content, skills, program designs, are scarce. And hence, you can sort of pilot it in one corner, and something that works in Mizoram may not work in Rajasthan, something that works in Rajasthan may not work in Karnataka, something that works in Karnataka may not work in Uttar Pradesh. So the question is, how do you identify what is context intensive, which is very specific to that place, and what is context independent, which can then be converted into some kind of an infrastructure. And so that in the initial days, it was all about, I can do something. I can solve this problem in my 5, 10, 20, 100, maybe 5,000 schools, maybe 10,000 schools. India has 1.5 million schools. Then we get into a situation where saying, what I have solved, I have abstracted, generalized, made available for many people to do and build on top of, is when we start moving to we, where we have a partnership structure of some people who are able to take this generic infrastructure and create solutions specific to their context, their states, their children, their society. And then the infrastructure keeps evolving, something like Sunbird or the Diksha platform keeps evolving, where now the infrastructure is ready for use by anyone. It is not that you have to be extremely tuned in to be able to do this. And it's not new. This line of thinking has been thought about in commercial platform cases in many, many places, right? And so the point is, why is it that we are not able to apply that kind of thinking to the development sector? And that's what has been the idea behind bringing in societal platform thinking, to saying, we know the power of platforms and how they can galvanize an ecosystem. But if we bring in societal objectives, if you bring in the need to develop free public goods, the need to power up the entire societal ecosystem, the need to drive benefit for all segments of society, then some of that thinking is applicable in our developmental the development sectors as well. So with that thought process, societal platform has sort of developed, and it continues to develop because it's a process that we're learning with at a very high speed, into what we call as a method or a way to do open societal development. Very carefully chosen words, open, because it allows a wide ecosystem to play on top of a shared infrastructure. Societal, because it's about different actors in the social ecosystem. So what we're talking about is government participants, which we call as Sarkar in India, or civil society actors, which we call as Samaj in India, or market actors, who we call as Bazaar in India. But these different actors have the ability to come together on top of a shared infrastructure to solve a problem. And development, of course, because we are focused on subjects of development such as education, healthcare, financial inclusion, water, sanitation, and so on and so forth. What you saw in Shankar's illustration is that while he was explaining to you what happened over the last few years, it kind of abstracts into 3 layers. It talks about a layer where different actors in the network, whether they are government actors or they are NGOs or they are institutions or they're different foundations, philanthropists, they got catalyzed together to work together on a program as large as a platform meant for 12 million teachers of India. The second thing that happened was that it brought in ideas, whether in form of content, whether in form of processes. So we say knowledge, processes, different kinds of data, different kinds of software, hardware. Different people bring in different kinds of innovations together to see how we can collectively, bring this, in the service of the overall mission of how do we do professional development of 12 million teachers. And the third thing that you saw happening was the catalysis of an open infrastructure, because most of the time when we say societal platform, everybody thinks about the platform because it invokes an image in the mind saying, oh, now we're talking about some technology, some platform. But the platform actually is not only a technology, that's the shared open infrastructure. The platform is the networks, the ability to bring innovators together and power it up with infrastructure together. All this put together is the idea of a societal platform. I had started in the beginning by saying, how can we empower these different kinds of large questions, right? Today on the call itself, we have participants who would have joined us from Avanti, where they are working on how can we deliver affordable credit to 100 million first-time borrowers in the next 5 years. Or we have, of course, people from Diksha and EkStep team who are focused on learning opportunity for children. We have participants on this call today from eGov Foundation who are looking at how can we transform governance through an open digital infrastructure for 2,000 cities. We have team members from Margyam who are looking at how do you improve or ensure water security for 100 million of the most challenged households in this country. So the question here is, if we have to answer this kind of a question, then we have to first of all imbibe a certain way of thinking. And from the experiences so far, there are 5 important areas in which we are looking at the paradigms that we need. So if you look at the bottom left, the first important aspect is how do we redefine the problem? It's not about this school, but it's about how do you define a problem to be complex, dynamic, and micro, which means we have to treat each situation as an individual situation, but at the same time understand the collective effect of it. So how do you redefine the problem to be a complex, dynamic, but yet a micro problem? How do you redefine the mission? Right? The classical mission is I will solve and distribute it over some kind of a platform or a distribution network. I have my portals, I have my apps, but that's not the point. It's not about solving and distributing. It is about distributing the ability to solve. How can different parts of the society solve that problem in their context? And what infrastructure is to support that? How do you amplify creativity? How do you restore the agency of the system so that they can do what is right in their context rather than one set of actors trying to say, I will solve the problems for the country? How do you redefine the approach itself? That, the EkStep Foundation, the example that you saw, for example, is a catalyst in the process. It is not that they are running, and Shankar made a very simple comment saying, if you look at Diksha, you will never find the mention of EkStep because Diksha runs with a contribution of EkStep called Sunbird, which means it's catalytic in nature. You bring in things, you catalyze, you drive co-creation, and you embrace laws of biology rather than, which are more organic, more supportive. So how do you create that ecosystem? How do you even define the ecosystem on the right side of the slide, which is it's an open, Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar, all come and play together rather than create silos where, I have my NGO, it has to grow. How do I do? Or I have my program in the government. How do I implement my program? Vis-a-vis catalyze them to come together on top of a shared infrastructure. And lastly, of course, is redefining the concept of sustainability itself, saying, how do you create an infrastructure that's evolving? The entire example that you saw today is an infrastructure that evolves literally weekly, monthly. It's so rapidly changing. And the reason why it is rapidly changing is because it's an infrastructure and not a locked-in, boxed, monolithic solution. It's highly modular, it's highly flexible. It allows us to go ahead and define newer and newer capabilities in layers over time. And that makes it extremely useful and powerful because our problems are not static. Our problems are dynamic. By the time you solve something, new facets of that problem or new problems surface. And instead of building a monolithic software that is implemented across n instances, if you build a platform, it allows you to create many more solutions, what we call as on a runtime basis rather than a one-time basis. So it's always complete. You can use it, but it is never finished. It's an ongoing journey as to how do you create the infrastructure going forward. Pretty much like, today you use internet, you use GPS, you use so much of infrastructure, which is digital in nature, but you don't even realize that while you're using it, it is evolving, it is developing, it is becoming better, even while you're using it, whereas product means I have to wait for cycles of upgrade and see if it really works, and it's not really updating runtime. So essentially, the central idea is about distributing the ability to solve. How do you accelerate the cycles of innovation into creating those three aspects: network effects, bringing innovators together on top of a shared infrastructure, in collaboration and co-creation mode with Samaj, which is society, Bazaar, which is market players, and Sarkar, which is the government, which is the central idea of a societal platform. It's a public good. All the value that you create accrues to the society. Unlike many commercial platforms where all the value you create accrues to the owner of the platform. In this case, nothing accrues to the owner of the platform because the platform is a free public good. So nothing can accrue to the owner of the platform. You share scarce resources because a classical commercial platform would look at how do you ring fence scarce resources so that you can improve your competitiveness. Whereas here the objective is to share scarce resources so that more and more people can do what you're trying to do. It nurtures open networks rather than creating closed networks. It tries to bring in different actors in collaboration with the platform and collaboration with each other, which is also as important. And lastly, and a very important aspect, it uses data to empower. In the example that you saw 3 GB of data coming into the platform every day. In a classical commercial construct, you would have taken this data to figure out how do you further the purpose of the platform forward. Whereas in the case of a societal platform, you would use this data to see what are the further developmental initiatives. How can you open up more ways of serving people? How can you open up more types of solutions? And so the entire objective of data is not to, so to say, make the platform more competitive, but how do you make the platform more useful and more open? So these are some important subtle differences between applying platform thinking to a societal purpose. So we have, over the 2 years that have gone by, we have worked on a framework where we have identified, if you were to embark on such a mission, how would you walk it through it in some kind of a thoughtful way? Because, when we listen to case studies, it's easier to understand, but when you have to apply it, some scaffolding helps. This is not intended to be a sequence of activities, but more, what are the important elements of trying to do this? For example, if you were wanting to drive a large societal platform initiative, you would think about how to develop a compelling mission. How do you model the scale? How are you going to do your platform strategy? How would you align the ecosystem? What kind of a system leadership is required? How would you time it, which we call as impact aperture? How do you decide on ownership of these platforms? Because, the platform may be built in place 1, incubated in place 2, scaled in place 3. Over time, ownership may go through its own transitions. How do you build networks? How do you bring innovators together? How do you build this infrastructure? How do you create adoption programs like Shankar talked about, saying, a mission could have 4, 5, 10, as many programs as it requires to achieve the mission. So how do you create the programs? How do you use data and telemetry to drive better governance? How do you proactively de-risk? Because these are large, complex programs, which obviously would require to be monitored and sustained over time. How do you do data design? How do you use data for empowerment? How do you use data to drive the improvement of the platform itself? And so what we have tried to do over time is sort of curate these important questions that can help people understand whether they have tried to understand those. There's no one way to do this. It's not a prescribed process. But what we can share, which we have created as a Creative Commons body of knowledge, is these are important questions. If you have answers to these questions, you will make progress. And of course, over time, you'll find better and better answers to the same questions. And the platform thinking continues to evolve. This is not easy. Let me end on a note that it requires extreme risk capital. This is not something that is, so to say, easy to pull off, saying, oh, I am already doing this. I can now just say, oh, now we can do this as a societal platform. I just don't want us to carry that view that this is another way of describing existing initiatives, because it is complex and different, requires distributed leadership, the ability to bring in different actors from Samaj, Bazaar, Sarkar to come take different leadership positions. Shankar showed that chart which said, here are the actors and here are the work packets. It takes a lot to define what is the leadership of different actors in these packets and how do you make them work. It's ideology agnostic. It doesn't say that you have to do only things this way or that way. You have to allow different ideologies to coexist. And that's very important. It requires deep technology skills because these platforms are internet grade, large scale, high transaction, high volume systems. So it takes doing to make them. And of course, it requires sustained ownership because over time, as the platforms grow, it has more and more need for more and more actors to come and take their respective ownerships. Finally, a note on system leaders. I'm quoting Peter Senge here. People who are able to pull off a societal platform-driven development is people who have the ability to see the larger system, because otherwise you can't catalyze the network. If you can't even see all the different actors in the entire system, then it's very hard for you to imagine what could you do with them. They always foster reflective and generative conversations because these are complex missions. And so bring people together on a positive narrative, bring people together on a can-do attitude. How do you create that environment where people are excited to come together? And of course, shift focus to co-creating the future, because when you're solving problems of this nature, it may take 5, 8, 10 years to do it. And by then the landscape would have shifted. So there is a lot of anticipatory capabilities saying, it should not be that by the time I solve it, the whole thing is behind me. So you have to think ahead. You have to think what are the problems that are going to come up and how to design infrastructure that can help solve. Otherwise, you're always doing this catch up with problems running faster than you. So they have the ability to foresee, to anticipate, and to be able to create an infrastructure on top of that. So different kinds of missions at the moment are at different stages of evolution. The idea is still evolving. There are more than 100 people across the world who are contributing their thoughts as we are distilling this across financial inclusion, lifelong learning, livelihoods, habitats, or even personalized healthcare. For you, it might give you some thoughts around how do you reimagine what you're doing? Can you really reimagine your approach? It's one way of doing things. It is not the way of doing things. Essentially, you may want to think about how to restore agency of the system, improving access, and those kind of things. The second thing is, how do you co-create? That may be an important question for you. How do you create a shared digital infrastructure on which large number of actors can come and co-create? Catalyze an open innovation ecosystem where people can come and work together, and development programs by Samaj, Bazaar, and Sarkar can all coexist on top of this shared infrastructure. It is not only for one type of program. And lastly, of course, is how do you use data and what is the meaning of that in driving more and more precision development and create a platform that can rapidly evolve as something that can help people deal with dynamic and complex challenges. So that's what it is. Of course, there's a lot that you can find about this on societalplatform.org. There's a podcast that we created. And at the same time, of course, you can always write to us in terms of finding more insights. Let me pause here and let me take Shankar, and I will now probably take a set of questions. Some have come in as we were talking, so we'll start with that. And then we will open up even for more questions with the team.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the 3 questions that have come up here. First is, can an independent teacher in a small town start using Sunbird to help his or her students? It's not very clear how to access the interface of Sunbird. Are teachers dependent on apps built on top of Sunbird platform? As of now, yes, teachers are dependent on apps. because Sunbird is not a software that you download and implement or use. It is a set of digital infrastructure that you use to build a program. And so to that extent, a teacher cannot start using Sunbird, but they can use Diksha and other apps that are built on top of Sunbird. Second question is, what is the incentive for any content creator to create learning experiences for the platform? As of now, from the ground, what research and feedback is showing is when teachers create content, they do it for the reward of that content being seen and making an impact. When you get data on the usage of content, it's a huge reward, and that is triggering a lot of content creation. Also, since the program is by the government, various state governments have set up expert teacher committees to create content. So in a way, creating content on Diksha is a recognition of a teacher's capabilities. A third answer to that is, as we've been seeing in the last 4-5 months, an idea of how to teach a content or a particular topic, what is known as a domain template, is very rapidly moving across from one state to another state. And the reward and recognition that is accompanying these teachers, they're government teachers as of now, is sparking interest from others to also create content. So there is no financial incentive. The incentive is one of recognition. The incentive is one of quantifying the impact of content on how many children and teachers it can teach, it can reach through Diksha platform. Third question, do you see the possibility of a set of platforms talking to each other? The answer is yes. And that is the power of digital infrastructure, which can talk to each other. And therefore, one infrastructure or even one platform need not solve all the complex interrelated problems in a sector like education. So this interoperability of platforms is part of the societal platform thinking. That is how Sunbird has been built, and that's how it will evolve also.
To add some illustrations on that, for example, when we have a platform which is focused on extending affordable credit for first-time formal borrowers, the same capability can be combined with, for example, a platform that is helping small and marginal farmers and artisans actually create their own organizations and try to improve their livelihoods. Or for example, if you have something like EkStep and Sunbird, which essentially translates into a micro-learning platform, and then you can use it with a water mission to improve water literacy of people because it's in the end a learning infrastructure. Or if you were to look at something which is being built out as a healthcare capability of managing, say, insurance schemes, you could use that capability to be able to manage, for example, construction schemes. So the ability to extract and generalize and create what we call as modular recombinable assets allows for interoperable and combined use of multiple platforms.
Yeah, there are more questions on that.
Yeah, there is a question from Shri Krishnan Ram. Has there been any resistance to such thinking and or some of the instances of this idea? Yes, obviously with any new idea, especially if it is different, there will always be resistance. There has been resistance, and that's fine. Because essentially the idea is not to evangelize this to everybody, but to work with those whose problems and whose efforts have made them open to this kind of thinking and work with them. The resistance from others comes from saying that this is totally different from what we are used to, the thinking is very complex, but how can you collaborate? How can you catalyze? And as Sanjay mentioned, the implementation is different. But our belief at EkStep is if there was any other way out, somebody would have done it. And it is not about this is the best idea, but it is a way of doing things. And there's a small group of organizations, and by small group, I'm including central government, state government, for-profits and not-for-profit NGOs who have been working on this for the last couple of years, and we're very happy and pleased with the progress. Sanjay, you want to take the other two?
Sure. So there's a question, if there is a plan to, can you hear me?
Yeah.
If there is a plan to build a societal level solution on top of Sunbird, will some criticism of the plan or evaluation be possible with Sunbird team? Oh, of course, anytime. Like I said, this is a Creative Commons open learning program. And so if there are some ideas and ways to make things better, that would be always more than welcome, because this is how the entire idea has evolved through participation of hundreds of people. And that is how we envisage it evolving, even coming up over time. So that the answer is yes. Karthik has a question. Hi, Karthik, how are you? But let me talk about how has your experience been working with the private sector or public sector adoption of societal platform thinking, specifically given that healthcare in India is about 70% private. We are seeing engagement of the private sector. Would request Shankar to give some illustrations in the case of education. But one interesting example is a large tech company took the entire infrastructure of Sunbird and decided to create a massive learning environment alongside private sector. Right. And so the question being, how do you, because most of the, even if you look at Sunbird is licensed under MIT license, right? You can go ahead and use that in that context, as long as you are engaged in the same mission, the collaboration is better. Otherwise, of course, it's open source, it's MIT. You could go ahead and create something and fork off in a completely different direction. But if you wanted to be a private sector participant on top of a societal mission, that is the whole fundamental objective. But in terms of experience, Shankar, would you like to share some examples of what's happening in the education context?
Yeah, so there are various conversations. In fact, one of them, which is, let me talk about the one beyond education. So Infosys has taken Sunbird and created its own learning platform on top of Sunbird. It's called Lex. So Lex is a learning platform for Infosys engineers, and there are around 110,000 of them on the platform. Lex belongs to Infosys. It's just been built on top of Sunbird, and all the data on Lex goes to Infosys. There's nothing that Sunbird gets as data or revenue or anything. That's a massive scale example of a private sector. In education, there are conversations where a for-profit company is looking at migrating its technology onto a Sunbird-based platform, because the depth of technology in Sunbird is such that it reduces the level of technology resources for private enterprises as they're creating their own platforms. Those are still conversations in flight. Beyond the government, Shiksha Lokam is another platform created by Advait Foundation. It is a not-for-profit foundation. They have created Shiksha Lokam along with a bunch of other not-for-profit institutions like Kaivalya, and they are working on the mission of impacting school leaders, which is headmasters, principals. They have also taken Sunbird, instantiated and created Shiksha Lokam on top. These are the examples in the education sector. Would any other beyond education? Avanti?
I think, Avanti, is a very interesting construct because it's a platform for extending formal credit to first-time formal borrowers. And herein lies the opportunity of multiple different kinds of actors, for-profits, not-for-profits, government actors, to be able to leverage this platform as it becomes more and more widely available as well as widely usable, to be able to actually find ways of better and better application of capital for development purposes. For example, if you have the entire impact investing industry, it could find a very interesting set of use cases on top of a platform like Avanti. Or if you have, obviously, philanthropic and foundation capital certainly makes sense. But tomorrow, if there is a private sector capital that wants to actually leverage this infrastructure to reach out to more and more people, I think going back to the central idea of societal platform, it does not limit, distinguish, prevent, prohibit any actor on account of their nature, whether they are state organizations, private organizations, or for-profit, not-for-profit, and so on. It does not limit any participation on ideological grounds. It does not limit any participation on account of, so to say, their maturity and their ability to leverage, because the platform is flexibly leverageable in different ways. What it allows you to do is to participate in a equitable market of societal development, in which obviously the balance finds its place. If you walk into a platform with a unviable value proposition, then obviously it is not going to last for long. So there's some things we talk about. For example, the facility or the ease of honesty is extremely high, but the price of dishonesty on the platform is very, very, the price is very high. And so the fundamental underlying constructs where any disproportionate appropriation of value is something that the platform does create an open environment to get equalized. But other than that, people can participate towards the developmental mission and the objective of the platform. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll take the next question again from Shri Krishnan Ram. The question is, can for-profit entities collaborate with societal platform instances? If yes, how? So in the example of Diksha, for-profit organizations have actually contributed some content. And the reason they have done is that the reach of Diksha is exponentially higher than any kind of reach the for-profit organization can deliver. So education initiative is an example. The second is Diksha reaches government schools, and government schools may not be target markets for profits because the children there may not be able to afford the pricing charged by for-profit. So in the case of Diksha, there is an upside for profits to participate because the content reaches a large number of people who would otherwise not, they would not be able to reach, and these are anyway not the target market for profits. However, in the process, the brand awareness is reaching hundreds of millions of children, and through that a larger ecosystem. So any for-profit that wants to quickly establish itself in the ecosystem can offer its content which is made available, and if the content is great and very well received, that increases the confidence of that for-profit to in its business model. So there's education initiative and a couple of other for-profit entities who are collaborating on Diksha. It's early days. We believe there are a lot of other business models that are possible. In the next year or so, we will investigate those.
Okay, so we don't have any other open questions. We can take one more if need be, but from what we see, we don't have any other open questions. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sanjay and Shankar, for the insightful session. We hope the audience found it engaging. Thank you, participants, for your time, for your questions, and your participation. We look forward to engaging with you with more webinars and other engagement sessions. If you have more questions or need more information, write to me at Sahana, SAHANA, at societalplatform.org. Thank you once again for your time.
Thank you.